on Monday, July 15th, to order at 6 p.m. Hello to members of council, my colleagues on council. To my far left, Councillor Novick, Councillor O'Keefe, Councillor O'Toole. To my far right, Councillor Duck, Councillor Duncan, and Councillor Garnett. And good evening to staff in attendance, and hello to members of the public in attendance. Happy summer to everyone. We made it through January and now have a real summer, and we see our community enjoying it every day. I'd like to next provide a territorial acknowledgement and respectfully acknowledge that we are holding our meeting this evening in the territory of the Wasanich people, the Sayut Nation, the Sartlip Nation, the Pakwachin Nation, the Saikum Nation, and the Malahat Nation. We continue to express our gratitude to the Wasanich people for their stewardship of these lands and waters for millennia, that is thousands of years, and we acknowledge the importance of working together with the Wasanich people for the stewardship of these lands today and for future generations. Turning to approval of the agenda, there are 4 changes since the agenda was published last Thursday. The first is we will add a council report for Councillor Duck, a verbal report regarding SIPP under council reports under number 11. We will add an addition to my mayor's report under number 10 with regards to the Anna Vet's 75th anniversary. Third, we will raise item 15.2 from correspondence. That is a letter from Joan Rosine regarding a noise complaint and a staff response. That will become item 14A under correspondence. And we will also raise item 15.3, which is correspondence from Devin Todd regarding watercraft users, and that will become item 14B. And with those changes, I would look for a mover and seconder that our agenda be approved as amended. Moved by Councillor Novick, seconded by Councillor Duck. All in favor? That motion carries. Thank you. We're now turning to public participation, and members of the public have an opportunity to come forward and address council for up to 4 minutes. I'll call for a first time if there's anyone wishing to speak this evening. I'll call for a second time. And for a third time, no speakers. We will close public participation. And we are next scheduled under 4D1 to have a presentation regarding a development permit application. And I will turn to Ms. Nelson. Again, the presenter is...
I got an email that he was showing up, so I don't know if it's okay. I haven't received any text or anything from him. I have the presentation. I don't know if you're comfortable to do that or not, but...
Thank you, Ms. Nelson. I'm comfortable if we continue other business, and perhaps after we go through each item of business, we can come back if Mr. Paul attends, or if we want to go with an option with an alternate presentation. So we will we'll move ahead from item 4D1 and also item 6A, which item 4D1 for members of the public is development variance permit application and a development variance permit application, and this is what we'll call perfect timing. Good evening. So I'll introduce Niall Paul Teal, principal with Island View Management, to make a presentation on development permit application DP 100845 and development variance permit application number DV 1100358 for 9667 5th Street to relax maximum height, maximum number of stories, minimum interior side lot setback, minimum setback from a parking space to property line, and maximum height of stairs in the front yard area in order to allow the form and character of a 3-story, 8-unit, multi-unit residential development. Good evening, Mr. Paul Teal. The floor is yours. You do have a presentation for up to 10 minutes, and we'd appreciate you taking questions after that.
Good evening. Can you hear me? That's great. Thank you, Mayor, Council, staff, and members of the public.
I'll just interject for one more moment, if I might.
Yeah.
If we could have perhaps Councillor Novick, if you could just turn that for benefit of members of the public.
Oh.
Just pivots there a bit.
Oh,
that's
perfect.
Great. Thank you.
Thank you very much, and thank you for receiving this application today. Just very briefly, I've got my presentation outline here where I'd like to talk about the context of the property, design principles, planning rationale, demonstrate our layout, the landscape plan, justification for the requested variances that accompany the development permit application. As well, I do have an alternative to one of the variances based on the feedback from our planning staff. As well, I just begin this, as every presentation, just respectfully acknowledging the lands on which we're located, the subject lands of this property being the traditional lands of the Wasanic Nations. For context, the site is 9667 5th Street, just 2 lots in from the 5th and Orchard intersection. It is zoned RM5 low density residential. It was previously the same zoning, and with the updated zoning bylaw there were a few changes to that zone, but overall it was the same designation through and through. As well, the OCP designation within the newly adopted OCP is neighborhood commercial. As well, I've outlined the relevant development permit area guidelines and policies that pertain to this property. In going through the DP guidelines and everything, it has been a pleasure so far working with your planning staff and using their knowledge and expertise in creating the inputs that have come to assist both Ms. Cumming and myself on the design process. You can see here in the map, I've just demonstrated the blue designates the subject property, and then the yellow, just for future context, is the laneway, which is the municipal right-of-way that would be developed to service this property from both a cycling and a vehicle access standpoint. When I set out in looking at property initially, I like to, both for myself internally, working with staff as well as working with my team, is just understand kind of what the core project principles would be in guiding this process. In this, it was really creating a thoughtful diversity of needed homes, demonstrated needed homes within the town, being that this property is so close to both the natural amenities at the to the south at Tallista, as well the more commercial amenities to the north and throughout Beacon Avenue. We thought that creating a housing mix that's thoughtful and needed is essential. Creating attainable tenure, both either as rental or as attainable commercial sale of homes. And then, of course, through design, creating a positive transition. Obviously, with Bill 44 and the changes that the town and other municipalities have contemplated, the nature of single family and residential neighborhoods, such as the Orchard intensive residential neighborhood, is changing. And this property really demonstrates a future phase and transition through Orchard into Beacon. Create quality open space through shared community gardens on the site, as well, patios and front porch areas for the different homes was incredibly important here in creating something that was thoughtful while also meeting the town's parking bylaw requirements. As well, utilize the laneway to create a vehicle access. This also means one of the values in this is obviously that we would be removing the current vehicle access that's on Beacon Avenue, creating a nice consistent sidewalk and street face interface, and preventing those kind of pedestrian vehicle conflicts, and allowing that multi-use road to fully benefit pedestrians and cyclists alike. So again, the clear policies here being the public open space, retaining the 2 natural pine trees that you'll see at the front of the property, and ensuring that the boulevard is expanded and there's an engaging, thoughtful interface there for residences. On the environmental sustainability, one of the big pieces, in addition to obviously ensuring that we're meeting step code level 3, is ensuring that we would not be using any natural gas within the property, and ensuring that the design takes advantage of the east and west solar exposure. As well, just general form and character was another set of DP guidelines. A highlight is obviously the accessible and interesting private and public outdoor interfaces. And then finally, we are within the neighborhood townhouse and multi-unit residential designation, which means that we have a unified architectural concept and varying degree of facade treatments. Here's a quick overview of the site layout. I've demonstrated 5th Street on the west side of the property, laneway on the east. You can see we have a mix of small and large parking stalls off of the laneway. We've had J.E. Anderson civil engineers demonstrate that the turn radiuses work in and out to access the laneway as well. We have the designated accessible parking stall provided here. And with our grading plan, in conjunction with the FCL report provided by Rysic Geotechnical. It also means that we don't have any stairs to access the rear unit or the garden units. So all of the homes proposed on the bottom 4 levels are all going to be gentle, lower, less than 5% slope access to ensure that it is a safe and stable transition. One of the neat things I'll focus on later within the landscape plan is there is an existing shed on the property that you'll notice today, as opposed to originally we had a design for a new shed, and then I went and walked one day and went, wait a second, this is almost the exact same size as the existing shed. So it fits the design more or less, and it works for our purposes. So the phrase that we've seen coined now is called a bike and bin, which would be bike storage for the strata or tenants, as well as a garbage and refuse storage for the laneway. And then obviously access both stairs going up to the townhouse units, and then the bottom patio access to the rear garden units. We've taken advantage of the side yard setback on the north side of the property to create more of like a formal accessible pathway design. And then the south side of the property, because of the more generous solar exposure, to have more of a planting and landscape screening design. We find that plants on the north side of the pathway typically don't do as well just because of the exposure that's typically found there. And then this plan does designate the 2 existing pine trees. However, we will be planting new pine trees as well in the blank areas, as you'll see in the later landscape plan. So here's our level 1 plan with the 2 interior units, which are 1-bedroom adaptive design standard units. And then the external units with the additional window, we decided to create probably a 1+ den design, which has that internal bedroom as well as the larger bedroom facing 5th Street, and as well with the 2-foot sunken FCL designation. It means that we have really nice, decent window sizes and solar exposure on both the front and the rear facing windows. Then we go up to the half floor above, or the 2nd floor, where we have the living space for the townhouse units. We have 4 of those with a repetitive space that's accessible from both stairs off of 5th Street, as well as rear stairwells off of the laneway parking access. And then we go up to the 3rd level, which is a 2.5 or 3-bedroom, depending on internal or external unit configuration, with modest bedrooms and shared bathroom, as well as stacked laundry facility on the top. Here is the elevation looking east of the homes as well. So you can see here there's the existing grade, the at-grade windows of the garden units from the street, as well. And then so this would be looking at the homes from 5th Street, and then the living spaces and the bedrooms above. And then the plan design flipped around, looking at it from the rear parking area. So here you can see the adaptive units access from the road. They have a covered patio area that would be provided shade from the stairwells themselves to the upper units. And then the above units also have their rear access, where safer access from groceries, etc., coming in. Quick overview of the landscape plan. Again, you see our expanded boulevard, the addition of pine trees, a nice cedar picket fence at the front, create that private public open space that we talk about within the design guidelines of the OCP, ample footprints for tree planting because we don't have any underground parking, as well accessible pathways, permeable pavers being used within the road right-of-ways as well as the parking areas. We have some nice decorative trees and hedging around, and then you can see our cute little community gardens and our shed that we salvaged from the current property. The required variances for this property are 5 to make this plan work. Number 1 is the building height, which really came from the justification of 1. If we went deeper, it would make it more challenging to have like the gentle ramp that we were talking about to make the units accessible. The second reason is because of the flood construction level report through Rysic, recommending we maintain only 2 feet of depth into the ground roughly. So the technical height requirement for this zoning bylaw is 9 meters. You do have other zoning bylaws to the south in Orchard that are up to 11, but I won't comment on that. But the 9 meter justification here means that because we are 9.54 meters, that's a 0.54 of a height variance. As well, the technical height is 3 because within the zoning bylaw, we are just a hair above the 2.5 stories that is allowed. The second one is the side yard setback. We have a bump out that was added to the third floor to provide a little bit more depth for the bedrooms on the upper level. So that becomes a 1.38 meter, but the building itself is actually 1.68 from the property line at the ground level. And again, that's just basically additional room within for unit layouts, because we are trying to create that front and back access and an open space area in the rear. There's a parking stall variance from the laneway. Again, that's just making the 8 stalls on the surface work and making sure that we have the accessible access in and out of the parking. And then the fifth one, I should say, is the 0.75 meter variance from the front entry steps. The new zoning bylaw has a particular height requirement for front steps of buildings. Again, driven by our floodplain construction level, as well the accessibility that we're trying to get in the grading between the front access and the rear laneway. We found that a single set of stairs was going to be better than raising the grade of the property. And there's a number of reasons. One, raising the grade and the soil would have a negative impact on the existing pine trees that we're working to retain. And then the second one is because we are already building this without raising the grade at all, which is consistent with the town's building bylaw, we didn't think that terraforming or sculpting was that necessary here. The third reason is you saw that we have larger set of windows in the front for those garden unit bedrooms. As soon as we start raising the grade, the windows in the bedrooms start to diminish as well. And so ultimately we found that just leaving a singular stairwell as opposed to doing too much terraforming and site planning would be to the benefit of the front yard. With respect to the variances, just hitting on the front side yard setback, this is one that I know planning staff have recommended that council have us rework as if we are to move forward to advisory design panel. One thought that I had or suggestion that I thought we could discuss would be the possibility of removing the bump outs on the side yard so that we would be going to the 1.68 meters, which is more in keeping actually with the old RM5 zone, which had a 1.5 meter side yard setback. This would actually be more generous than the previous zone, but it would eliminate those bump outs and kind of come up with a bit of a compromised approach. It would mean that we reduce the upper bedrooms a little bit, but if the goal is to create more porosity between the sites, this is something that we could certainly do, and of course it would increase the overall net side yards by 0.6 of a meter. So that is a very quick overview of my plans, and appreciate council's consideration. I understand this is later on the agenda. As you're aware, I'm here now to answer questions, but also when this item comes up for discussion, I could also be available if council had anything to raise at that time as well.
Thank you for your presentation, Mr. Baltiel. I'll turn to colleagues on council if there are any questions. Or sorry, I need to follow the agenda. So the agenda is following the presentation from the applicant. We have a public participation period allowing members of the public to come forward and make any comments or ask any questions that they may have. So before we go to council questions, I'll open it up and ask if there's anyone wishing to come forward to speak on this development. I'll call for a second time and a third time, and seeing none, we will now go to council questions. So please, if you would come forward again, and I'll turn to colleagues if there are any questions. Councillor Duncan, to start us off.
Yeah, thank you. I like that you've offered an alternative for the bump out. How would that change the dimensions of the bedrooms?
Thank you for that. I did put up a layout. Okay, so here, so if you can see, so the two stacked plans that you see in front of you here, the upper plan is showing the external layout with the bump out. The lower plan is showing an interior floor plan without the bump out. Effectively, we would just replicate the interior plan for the exterior plan, right? So the exterior plan, we just gained a little bit more kind of bedroom and bathroom space there. Basically, it would just be a repetition of that. So we would lose a little bit of, and I can't read but basically, we would lose 0.3 of a meter in either one. Because that's the shared scale back that would be required to reduce the bump out.
Okay, thank you. And my second question was, on the main floors of the upper townhouse units, you have the dining room entry followed, and then the kitchen and the living room. Is there a reason that you have those things in that order? I'm just thinking for entertaining, that when you have people over and then they have to walk through the kitchen while you're going there, it's a different layout than I've seen before. And I'm wondering if there are other ways that things can be rearranged inside to meet the bylaws while also, but if there's limitations of, you know, plumbing or fixtures and how they go together between the upper stories and lower ones.
Yeah, that's actually, you hit it on the nose. That's exactly, like, I'm fairly agnostic, if that's the right word, between like dining room and living room layout, but having just because ultimately, like you said, from an entertaining standpoint and everything, it really, whether you have your couch or your living space looking over 5th Street or your dining space there and then your living space in the back, we did put a entry closet coming into like from the back side where the parking is, which we thought made a bit of sense then when you're coming in from your vehicle or you know, et cetera. The reason why I'm a big fan of the galley kitchen here is that it saves space, it creates a lot of open air, and then you can have larger windows on both the front and the back patio areas as well, because you're not dealing with cabinets and countertops blocking. We have one of these in our home and we're really happy with it. And then the third thing, I think the biggest point here is if you see the bathroom stack both on the upper level here where the ensuite and the laundry and washer dryer are, as well the stack for the lower unit as well, you'll see it's all in the center of the building. And so builders really like having that kind of consistency and that kind of vertical integration within the building, because it saves a lot of pipes and additional resources being kind of spent throughout the building. So it's a great question, and that was kind of the design that we landed on. But to answer your question as well, I don't see moving those around saving us feet or even inches in possible layout. It's really more making the bedrooms work to make it a 3-bedroom family unit above.
Thank you. I just kind of wanted to see how you were thinking of it in terms of saving space, and it sounds like you put some thought into it. And it'll be more APC type questions,
Yeah.
I'm sure.
Yeah, of course. Thank you.
Well, thank you, Councillor. Turn to colleagues if there's any further questions. Councillor Garnett.
Thank you, Mayor. Thank you, Mr. Peltiel, for your presentation. Landscape plan. That'll be the slide I'm going to ask the first question on. So with regards to, and thank you for providing 2 24 square meter spots for trees as opposed to 1. And I actually looked up the particular tree to see how it would work in our community, and it seems like it's a pretty hardy tree, so that's a great thing. I'm just wondering, in the process, this is going to be a question that probably doesn't get answered a lot or asked a lot, but at what point would you be envisioning planting the trees? Because I know, generally speaking, in the developments, the boulevard trees kind of get lost in the shuffle and when they actually go in the ground. So in terms of getting them in there and established before there's lots of activity with people living in the homes.
Yeah, I think my impression would be, and that's could be a takeaway for me to discuss with the arborist as well, as far as like what the critical path is for success there. But ultimately, I think one of the reasons why these typically get done later is because you want to do it, when the full services are in, to make sure that you've got your irrigation and everything covered, but B, that the other challenge is, you know, if you're like, the benefit to this site is that you're going to be able to do a lot of the staging and the construction layout in the rear laneway so that you're not disrupting the boulevard as much. But obviously, we're going to want to make sure that we're not disturbing the landscaping with any construction activities like loading or, you know, flatbed, you know, whatever else, you know, typical activities come through. So really it's as early as possible without impacting the critical path for construction. So it's a great question, and I haven't really answered it, but as you know, I appreciate it. The other thing I would say is just the pine trees there are quite mature, and I know one thing that frustrates me a ton is when you see a development and they plant a twig that's supposed to be emblematic of supporting good urban forest principles and everything. So I would imagine what we source here as far as complementary trees are going to have to be fairly mature as well, just to help encourage the same interface that we're seeing in the boulevard already.
Thank you. Next one. I noticed in the back you the driveway is permeable cobblestone. And I was wondering about cobblestone until I saw the picture, which is great because I'm thinking cobblestone, I'm thinking of Italy. I'm thinking, how is somebody with accessibility issues can be able to travel over that? But now it makes sense from looking at your picture. But with regards to the actual parking spaces themselves, I couldn't find on here what they would be constructed of.
Yeah, that's a good question. The parking spaces themselves, I would imagine we would continue with like an asphalt parking, and just because asphalt would be typically a bit easier for us to contour and grade and everything on a slope site. And then what we would be doing is, I mean, the permeability starts with the pavers, but ultimately we are going to be coming in off the laneway, which is going to be asphalt as well, the municipal standard. And then while it's not shown in this plan, one thing that we've been working on with your planning and engineering staff would just be to have some French drains that would basically run along the end of the parking, but the start of the patios, to ensure we're not negatively impacting our own floodplain construction, but also just ensuring that we are creating a good storm capture so that we're not negatively impacting our neighbors or we're not overflowing the municipal system at the same time.
That actually leads into my next question, if I may, Mayor. When I'm looking at the grade, I'm thinking of what would be put in place in terms of like an atmospheric river or a significant rainfall event, and having that kind of water rushing towards there, and how that would be dealt with in terms of not going into the garden suite area with that slope. So that's kind of the plan, is to have.
That's the stopgap, for sure, and it is a consideration, especially when you're in an FCL level and you're doing anything that is subterranean, which speaks specifically to the first, second, and last variants, which are all the stair height as well as the floodplain. It's all to do with making sure that those accessible units are habitable to the highest standard possible, so that we're still fitting within the design guidelines of the town, but not creating a compromised living space for anybody.
Perfect. And I'll just ask one more at this time, Mayor. So, if in terms of the actual building, was there any consideration given to potentially, and I don't know about the financial viability of it, but in terms of the actual size, pulling back on the density and perhaps creating 6 units, 3 up, 3 down, just to provide the opportunity for more green space on the lot, which would improve the livability not just for the residents but for the community as a whole?
I think that this is, like, relatively speaking, in the Orchard neighborhood, this is a kind of a rarely decent sized lot, and so I think that you're going to find that even with the aspirational numbers that the province has put out and all these zoning bylaws and everything, I think you're going to find that in a lot of the more suburban neighborhoods, people may not be maximizing out the density that could be built as much as they could, being that this is the RM5 zone, and it is kind of, in my interpretation or understanding from the OCP and everything, this is meant to be that kind of interface that bridges between the traditional neighborhood and the core of the town, if you will. I think that this is the right balance, and I think that the zoning bylaw could potentially create much more of a very low scale apartment building almost, and so this more of I call it a stacked townhouse design. I think it is that modest bridge of density, but to answer your question, the economics also would not support lowering the density at this point.
Okay. Thank you, Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor Garnett. Any further questions? Councillor Duck.
Yes, thank you, Mayor, and thank you, Mr. Patel, for your presentation. Just a thought you raised, the existing shed you wish to hold on the property, and this would be a combination of a bike shed and garbage collection. Is there enough room in that shed for both of those operations? And then I have another question following that, but just, it seems like a very small shed, but I'm not sure of the dimensions of the shed.
Yes, so the shed there, it's something, to answer your question, we haven't detailed out extensively. I think that ultimately the townhouse design itself, there should be adequate storage within it as well for bikes. So this would almost be like a person's second bike, or families or kids, etc. So like, I would imagine that the bike storage would be, vertical off to one side. You might have some area that's planting garden supplies as well, etc. And then the remainder would be recycling and garbage and everything. You're absolutely right, though. We may even want to talk to planning about working in a buffer into that area, just so that we're not coming back to you with a development permit amendment for a slightly larger shed. So that's a fair point.
Thank you. And my second question is relative to that same shed, as that's going to be your collection point for garbage, recycling, and compost. I assume you'll be contracting that service for those pickups, because it will be that's not your standard stopping point for the collection services in that area right now, I believe.
That's a great question. I'm not entirely sure what the mechanism is for that. I know that my understanding is that the town's design guidelines, especially for multifamily, do encourage all of these activities to be more focused around the rear of the property. I don't know if planning has any insight or light on that, but if it does need to be contracted privately beyond the zones that the town affords, I would imagine that would be an issue for either the landowner if it's a rental or the strata if it's a condo.
Great, thank you. Thank you, Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor Duck. Seeing no further questions, I have 4, I think. If you could first go to the east elevation, showing the back doors of the lower units. So if I understood, and thank you for the presentation, if I understood correctly, the entrance on those lowest units will be level with the gradual sloping parking. Given what the flood control level is, where the build is, not where the flood control level is, where the build is, when a resident enters their door on the lower unit, will they then be stepping down into their unit?
No, this would be flat at grade, so there wouldn't be any further step down. So that where you see it labeled finished grade there at the bottom. Sorry, do I have a?
That's okay.
Oh no! How would you see where I'm pointing at? Because it's been a long day. So the finished grade, effectively, like it would be the sill of the door, and you'd be walking directly into your home. All of the sloping basically finishes before the rear patio for those lower units. And what I think I should do for ADP, based on this question, and also for any future presentation to council, if I do move forward, would be to include a east-west elevation showing the grade and how that works from laneway back, so that you can have a fulsome understanding of that. No, that's no problem.
Well, that's great. I appreciate the answer. My second question, if you could go to, we can stay here for now, is with regards to the side interior north and south setbacks. And we appreciate what your original request was. We understand what the staff recommendation is. You are looking for a middle ground, but if council were to go with the staff recommendation, have you given consideration as to what changes you would make?
Yeah, simply put, it would be a further narrowing of the each of the units to accommodate it. I think that the repetition that this plan creates and the interface that it creates with the street and everything is the goal here in this plan. It's also in keeping with the development permit guidelines for multifamily housing in many cases. I guess the reason why I'm hesitant there is because I don't know what you're necessarily gaining by adding another 0.4 of a setback to get to that 2 meters in benefit necessarily to the town, other than just a bit more breathing space between the homes, which I get. But the trade-off for that is just, you can see in our the layouts that we've provided you of the internal units. I just know that the more we narrow, the more you're just compromising both the accessible units, living space and transition space, as well as the upper bedroom spaces as well, which is really the two kind of critical points where it's really important to me in this plan that we do have, family-oriented housing above and accessible and senior or workforce-oriented housing below, and the more we compromise that, we're losing valuable inches within those spaces. And so I'm never going to say no. I will oblige if you decide to keep with the recommendation of 2 meters, but I think it's one of those things where we have to ask for what and understand what those trade-offs are.
No, thank you for taking the question, and I appreciate that you have given consideration. to that. Next is if you could go to the site plan, please, one of the first slides.
Oh, there we
That one. So appreciating your meeting our loading and parking bylaw requirements for number of parking spaces and size of parking spaces. So our loading and parking bylaw does indicate you're permitted to have 2 small car spaces, which we see at the lower right of the diagram, and also 1 accessible parking space, which we see in the top left.
Mhm.
Given this is a smaller multi-unit, smaller number of multi-unit development, I'm just thinking of the practicality that if in fact the residents don't, 2 of the residents don't have small cars, have you given consideration to what the leeway is for how those residents, because you've already made reference to the drive aisle, is that, how does that become practical? And so have you given consideration while you're meeting the requirements to the practicality if in fact you don't have 2 residents with small cars?
Yeah, no, I mean, I guess I haven't thought about the practicality of it. I think that there's cases in Greater Victoria, in many cases, whether it's a rental building or a condominium, where, you know, the sales occur and somebody either renting or purchasing a home needs to understand that, you know, yes, their F-150 isn't necessarily going to fit there, and so they need to be aware of that. Just like parking, you know, buildings get sold without parking units, and that individual needs to understand that, you know, they're going to either have to sell their car or you know, transition their lifestyle to make that work. I think that if council felt strongly for whatever reason that they wanted to have the full-size parking layout, I again will oblige. I think that the loss there would probably be in a couple of the raised garden beds, because you would need some sort of flow through without those rear pavers to the very far south corner, southeast corner. And then further, I believe we would probably remove the existing shed, and we'd have to design something a little bit narrower. But again, it could work. But we may be coming back to you with further variances to vary the site layout of that accessory building, because we may be encroaching the neighbor's property as well. So it's all about trade-offs. And I did seriously consider whether this property would constitute a parking variance and maybe just going for fewer than 8 stalls, less than a 1-to-1. But ultimately, I think it makes sense to keep the modest amount and meet the bylaw from that requirement.
Oh, thank you for the answer on that. My last question is with regards to flood control level. And so we know that there's a requirement, and you have submitted professional engineers recommended flood control level of 4.35 meters. If we can go back to the east elevation diagram for a moment. That's the way, there's east, yeah. So we do appreciate that this design is in compliance with that professional engineer's flood control level report. However, it does mean that those lower units are 1.56 meters, 5 feet 1 inches below the engineer's recommended flood control level. Did you give consideration, no, I do want to acknowledge, because you indicated in your report and it's in the drawings, that you have raised, and it's hence the increased height variance request of I'm sorry, about a half a meter. Yeah. So there is some accommodation there, but there is still 1.56 meters of habitable floor space that is below the flood control level. Did you give consideration to raising it further?
We did. I think it wouldn't negatively impact the development to go to grade effectively and just match the grade and not have to worry about the site contouring and slope and everything. My goal was to make more modest variance requests, I guess, and so meeting the minimum recommended by RISAC and the FCL report was the way we did that. But if council felt as though it would be better as almost a kind of a belt and suspenders approach, or a more conservative approach, just to say, you know what, he's already asked for 3 stories. Let's go up to I guess in that case, it would be, 10 meters in height, which again is very in keeping with the new zones for the intensive residential infill as well in this neighborhood. We could oblige to meet that. It would just mean you'd also have to understand or be okay with the fact that you would also be getting a further variance in both the technical height of the building as well the stair height at the front, which are commensurate to facilitate that. But no, I think it would be a good design with that, in fact, as well.
Thank you very much for that answer and for taking my questions and colleagues' questions. Seeing no further questions, we'll close the presentation portion. We will be coming to the agenda item next for council deliberation and any questions of staff. We don't usually have the applicant participate, but if there is a question that arises, I'm certainly open to inviting you back into the meeting to take that question. Okay, thank you. And so we are now turning to item 6.A, which is the same development permit and development variance permit. I won't read out the description again. And I will turn to Ms. Verhagen for an introduction, please. Good evening.
Thank you. Good evening. Yes, as was just presented, this is an application for a development permit and a development variance application to allow 5 variances to allow the form and character or the look of this 3-story, 8-unit, multi-unit townhouse residential building. Be happy to answer any questions you have. Thank you.
Thank you. So I'll turn to colleagues if there are any questions of staff. I have a question of staff, and I might ask Mr. Paul-Teal if you could go back to the site plan, maybe just leave the site plan. That's great, thank you. Just further to the question through to staff. Just a further question with regards to Councillor Duck's question on garbage recycling and yard waste pickup. We see it's a slightly narrower than usual. Certainly meets guidelines. Drive aisle. I'm just wondering the amount of recycling and garbage for 8 units is going to be fairly substantial. Have staff given consideration as to where it would be placed and what the arrangements would be for pickup?
Sure, thank you. Section 6 of the zoning bylaw talks about landscaping and screening. So it does require that recycling and garbage containers need to be screened on their perimeter on at least 3 sides. So they need to be screened with a minimum height of not less than 1.8 meters or just about 6 feet above finished grade. So enclosing them in an accessory building like this would meet that bylaw requirement. There's also design guidelines in the multi-unit residential design guidelines for the development permit component about screening garbage and recycling. So this would meet that as well. It is important to look at the functional layout of the space, but there's no minimum square footage per unit proposed for development. So we don't have any kind of bylaw requirement like that. In terms of who would be picking up the material, Ms. Clary may want to confirm, but I believe a multi-unit residential development like this can choose to arrange their own private pickup. The strata can choose to do that. They would have to, if they don't do that, they would have to choose to opt into the town service. That looks correct. Yeah.
Well, thank you. That's helpful. And so we see the building that's designated as being recycling and garbage, the current shed. So I do see there's a walkway from near the border of the property, the back of the property. So the pickup company would just go down that path. I mean, in a functional sense, would just to go down the path to what is in essence a screened facility for it.
As far as the route that the company would take, that would have to be determined between the strata and the contractor, whether they would pick up from 5th Street or from the back lane. I'm not sure what they would do there. Okay. Just a note on the shared use of bicycle parking, though, it's important to note that the town's parking bylaw, while it requires secure enclosed bike parking for some multifamily residential uses like apartments, it does not require that for townhouse uses because it's assumed that the townhouses will have space within the unit to provide their own bike parking. So providing it separately in a building like this is not required by the bylaw, but it's welcome, it's proposed. So.
Thank you. That concludes my questions for staff. I'll turn to Councillor Untitled.
I'd like to make a motion if you're ready for that, Mr. Mayor.
Please go ahead.
Thank you. I'll move that DP 100845 and DV 100358 at 9667 5th Street be forwarded to the Advisory Planning Commission for further review and comment, subject to the condition that prior to review by APC, the applicant provides a revised set of plans for the interior side yard setback.
Second.
We have it moved and seconded. I'll turn to the mover and seconder first.
Yeah, thank you. So that altered the recommendation somewhat, and so we heard from the applicant, from the presenter this evening, about the possibility to make some amendments to the plan that they are quite comfortable with. We've seen the staff recommendation that this be addressed more fully in keeping with the requirement. I think between now and when this comes to APC, it gives the time to the applicant to revisit this with staff and take a look at their approach. And then we'll see what comes forward at APC, recognizing that it may well comply in the end with what staff's recommending here ultimately, but that it gives APC the opportunity to consider and make a recommendation back to council in any event. The only other comment I'll make, because I know the mayor, when you had referred to FCL and the prospect of building to grade, and was noted that that would lead to perhaps some further height variance requirements. I think that probably does come up during APC, and we'll see where that discussion leads. But I think from my point of view, at least at this time, the motion as has been put forward is perhaps the most flexible to allow the applicant to continue a dialogue with staff before this comes to APC. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. Before going to the seconder, just for clarity, you did acknowledge that the end of the motion was amended slightly. If you could just read that portion again, that the applicant provides.
Yeah, I'll read that. I guess the last two lines. So the applicant provides a revised set of plans for the interior side yard setback, period.
Thank you.
So removing that comply with and the reference to requirement.
No, thank you for that clarity. I'll turn to the seconder, please.
Thank you, Mayor, and yes, I concur with that, and I would suggest to the applicant give some thought to the discussion around garbage and compost and recycling, because it will be the only property on that side of Orchard that is getting collection. On the back side, currently collection takes place on 5th. South of Orchard, I know they do laneway, and that's a paved laneway, and they do collection there, so it would be some concern that 8 units of compost and garbage and recycling are being put to the, I don't think, it doesn't appear from the drawings that would be an opportunity for the owners or occupants of the units to bring it to 5th Street. So just to give some thought around the design there and to accommodate that, and as well the narrowness of that laneway as to the vehicles to get down there and pick it up. So yes, I'd like to see more thought on that. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Duck. I'll turn to Councillor Garnett, and then Councillor Duncan.
Thank you, Mayor. Through you to staff. I would like to know the planning department's comfort level with the motion as it reads, as opposed to what was originally recommended.
Thank you. Through the mayor to Councillor Garnett, the staff recommendation was clear on what type of revisions were requested from our planning perspective. The motion that's been made does not give direction on what type of revisions are being looked for, but clearly the meeting is recorded. Anybody who watches the video will understand the discussion, but there's no direction in the motion about how to revise the plans. Thank you.
Thank you. Yeah, I won't support it because I actually agree with staff. Been to the sites on a few occasions, and we just went through a zoning bylaw process, and this was specifically put in there with this 2 meters, and I understand in terms of trying to fit it, maybe perhaps 0.16 each unit has to be a little less, but I think it's important. But standing on the street, looking right now, even at the house to the north at 9675 5th Street, this building is going to tower over it, and I think any further distance we can pull back is better for privacy and sound, whatever have you, just better for the neighbors living there now, and actually in the future, if the neighborhood develops in the way we want it to, we need to have that separation. And I think staff has come up with this number for a reason, because it will help soften everything. It'll stop the massing looking like it's continuing on. like we have in other areas of our community. And I think it's really important, not only from aesthetics, but from livability as well. And it's only a little bit of space, but that's still a little bit more green space we can allow for within the development. And just standing there looking at it, trying to look at the picture and hold it up, trying to visualize what it would be like. I think if I was the neighbor next door at 9675, I would want every inch I could of separation between a building that's going to be that tall next to me. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Garnett. I'll turn to Councillor Duncan.
Thank you. I'd initially had kind of a similar reservations about the wording of the recommendation, but I believe it was based on the fact that Mr. Peltiel has already brought forward, what they would bring forward in terms of how they would be altering that. So I think it was okay that the intention seems clear. He understands. I don't know if we need to give either staff or the developer more direction, but I'm okay with the idea of removing that bump out as a compromise. I know my existing house, which was built in 1970, doesn't have a setback that large from the rear property line. And so, I know as we're building more townhouses and higher and massing, that we've realized if we have many structures in a row like that, it's going to be a problem, and mine can get away with that sort of thing because the surrounding properties have backyards in that place for half of the distance, and not a house for the entire thing. That I'm worried that in this case, given the layouts and the way they've had to squeeze parking and that shed on there in the first place, that what the eventuality would be is possibly losing a bedroom. If we had it come in, and that would be, I think, a bit of a shame. So I'm okay with what is essentially a ruler width on the side. I'm hoping that while the applicant is kind of looking at the questions that Councillor Duck has brought up about the shed and the garbage pickup, that also with the bicycles, I know I'm looking at those stairs and going, there's no way anybody with many bicycles for the family is going to be storing their bikes inside and getting them up those stairs. And a family like mine that has a cargo bike which weighs over 100 pounds is definitely not. Obviously we don't have a car, so what I would hope we could start looking at is for families like that might actually be dropping the car, since we're spending a lot of money, or getting developers to spend a lot of money to put in electrical chargers, that most of which will never be used, that the most socially and environmentally responsible thing to do would be to start looking at ways we could actually put in some sort of external bike locks, so that people who had bikes can put bikes at the end of their parking stalls, the way they do in some underground parking of condos. It wouldn't be the most secure thing ever for people who have very expensive bikes, but it might be a direction we can start looking at that would accommodate that, and I don't know if that's something they can look at, but I thought I would put it on the record. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Duncan. I'll turn to Councillor O'Keefe.
Thank you. I'm in favor of the motion for a number of reasons. First of all, I like the development. I like this stacked concept. I'm surprised that we haven't seen it sooner. I'll maybe ask another time why that is, but for the time being, I think it's a good model. Allows to get a number of units, especially those ground level units that I think are in demand with seniors. I know people in the seniors community that are looking for places, and you can't get like a bungalow anymore. So something like this is I think is really good, and also for persons with disabilities as well. I like the effort that's gone into the coming up with landscaping, the garden beds, that sort of thing. In terms of the wording of the motion, I'm okay with that. It sounds like if we can bring that bump out in, then we're looking at still a variance, but to me, it amounts, it's minimal on each side. So in the interest of, I think people who buy those would prefer to have a bit more space inside rather than, maybe a foot extra of yard. So I'm fine to do to move forward with that. In regards to the recycling and garbage, that's a concern also, and I realize it meets the requirements that we've asked for in terms of they have a building where they can put their stuff, but I'm surprised that we don't have any provision for how it's gonna get picked up. And I guess that's a discussion for us for another day, but I think we have an obligation to make sure, especially as we continue to densify like this, that we start making a provision for that and not just leave it to the residents and the developer to sort it out with a contractor. Because the contractor could just say, no, we're not gonna walk down the lane and haul out all your bins. And if they're left with no way to get rid of their garbage, then that's a health concern. So discussion for another day, but I'm fine seeing this move forward for now. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor O'Keefe. Councillor Novick.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. And thank you for the presentations, all very informative. I'm okay with the motion as it's been presented, because at this point we're really referring this to the APC to see what they're going to have to say. And I suspect, having been on the APC, that they're going to have a lot to say about this. I'm concerned about the development for a number of reasons. We have a brand new zoning bylaw that's in place, and one of the very first developments that's coming before us is looking to tear it all down and change setbacks and that sort of thing. And that concerns me, because our staff did so much work on that bylaw. Why can't we have developments that comply with it? I'm concerned about the lack of green space. Councillor Garnett's comments, I think, were very well founded. I'm concerned about livability. It's tight. I applaud the fact that the middle units in the lower levels are accessible, but they are very small units, notwithstanding. The shed out and back for garbage, you have 8 units. They're each going to have a whole bunch of recycling bins, garbage bins, et cetera, et cetera. I'm not sure that that's a practical solution for either garbage or bikes. And typically there's going to be a strata that's going to look at this and say, okay, well, now what do we do? I'm really anxious to see what APC says. They have a way of getting to the crux of the matter, and I'm sure that we'll have a lot more to think about when it comes time to actually approve these development variance permits. So I'll leave that for now, but I do have concerns. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Novick, and thank you to colleagues for your earlier questions and your deliberations. I'm supportive of the recommendation for this to go to APC. I'm pleased to see that the applicant currently has the intention of this being rental, which I think is very important for our community. That we understand, based on the economics to some degree, it may not be rental, but there's an intention to try to pursue that, which I think is good for our community. I favor the staff recommendation with regards to the side yard setbacks. I'm willing to support this motion to go to APC, but want to state my views as colleagues have, and repeat that not only have we just redone the zoning bylaw, but we redid the OCP, and it was the zoning bylaw being consistent with the OCP and the input we had during the OCP process that, given we were going to higher density in our community and more multi-unit buildings, that these separations are important for a number of reasons, not only ambience and livability, but for the reasons that came out during those processes. So I'm willing to to hear from APC, but at this point I think setting a precedent on our first application of this type is really setting a precedent with regards to side yard setbacks after staff have gone through the careful work through our OCP and zoning bylaw process. Other comments are with regards to the parking, which I made comment earlier, and while the applicant indicated that if council were to request a change in those small small car parking spaces to larger. I don't know that it's in our purview to pass a recommendation that that be the case, because the applicant is meeting the parking requirements within our loading zone. I would ask the applicant to consider making those full car spaces, because I think from a practicality standpoint, we see multi-unit buildings in our community where there are second cars being parked on the street. And in this case, we could have first cars parked on the street because of these small car parking spaces. With regards to FCL, one of the things I think we've all noticed in our community is 2 addresses to the south at 9645 is a 6-unit townhouse development. It's actually on a piece of property that's larger than this. This is about 8,200 square feet. That development is 11,000 square feet, and it had 6 units. And the flood control level recommended by the engineer for that development was very close to this one, and that shouldn't be surprising given their proximity to each other. This one is 4.35, that was 4.25. But the applicant decided in that case to have the main floor area start at the flood control level as per the engineer's requirement. And as I commented during a question to the applicant, that in this case, the main floor living area will be 5 feet. And I'm sorry, I relate to feet better than meters. It is 1.56 meters. Will be 5 feet below the flood control level. And so while again this is meeting, this particular design is meeting the meeting all of the town's processes and meeting the professional engineer's flood control level, I would ask the applicant to consider moving this to grade. The implication is, because it would reduce the number of feet, it won't reduce entirely the 5 feet below FCL, but it would reduce it, and I didn't do the calculation, but by at least a couple and a half feet. It would do a couple of things. It would make that back area level, but the second thing is it would increase the height. However, this council and previous council have given height variances to other developments within the Orchard neighborhood for this very reason, was to address the flood control, the FCL recommended by those engineers. And I think with what we see elsewhere in the neighborhood with regards to heights, that it would be acceptable for this development to be a little higher if it was providing what I would call greater livability in coming closer to that flood control level. With regards to bicycle parking and garbage and recycling, I can appreciate that again, this design meets the requirements, as staff indicated from an earlier question, in terms of providing the facilities, they're screened. However, from a practical standpoint, I think one cargo bike is going to kind of use up a lot of the space, having visited the site, in terms of recycling and garbage bins fitting in that area. I don't see the area around that shed being very significant. I do appreciate the raised beds. But if something can be considered for that space that is left beside the raised beds, to quite frankly provide proper or adequate, better bicycle parking opportunities for the residents, and also Councillor Duncan's idea of actually blockable bike spaces at the end of parking spaces could be a viable one. But again, I want to acknowledge that in our parking and loading bylaw, there are not bicycle parking requirements on development of this type. It does come into play for larger multi-unit buildings, but it doesn't come into play on this. But I think, again, for the livability within our community and within this development, better bicycle parking would be appreciated. I will leave my comments there, and with us all spoken, I'll turn to any second-time speakers. Councillor Garnett.
Thank you, Mayor. I just for clarification purposes, I do support this going to APC in general, but just not the way the motion is worded, and as staff spoke to, is the lack of direction that I'm not comfortable with. And just another comment, because they didn't pass it the first time, and The reason I think it is important, other than the reason staff and the rationale staff has provided for having the 2 meters, and it may only seem like a little bit of distance, but when you develop out a community and you add up all those little bit of distance of green space, it does make a difference. And when I look at this proposal, which fits in with most everything it needs to, I see and this is where the province wants us to go, I see such a lack of green space. And I see that taking place over and over again in our community. So I see every chance we can to add green space to a development. We need to do it. So thank you, Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor Garnett, and I'm sure you're aware of this, but I'll just note it, that you do have the option of making an amendment to go to the staff recommendation, which would test the floor. We do know this will come back from APC with comments, so I just wanted to provide that opportunity. Seeing no further discussion, I'll call the question. All in favor? Opposed? Councillor Garner is opposed. The motion carries. Thank you, Council. Thank you again, Mr. Paltiel, for coming this evening, your presentation and taking questions. Turning the page on the agenda, we are now going to adoption of minutes, and we have, if I could have a mover and seconder that the minutes from our regular council meeting of June 24th be approved as presented by moved by Councillor Duck, seconded by Councillor Novick. Any errors or omissions? Seeing none, all in favor? The motion carries. Thank you. That takes us down to the mayor's report. The single item I wanted to positively comment on tonight is I want to thank Councillors Garnett and O'Keefe for joining me at the 75th anniversary celebration at Anavets in our community on Saturday. It was great to see the membership come out. It's one of the largest Anavets in Canada at 983 members, and it was impressive. And in my remarks to members that day, I commented that while it's easy to say 75th anniversary, when you think that when you walk that back, it takes it to being established in 1949, and for me that seems like a longer period of time. But it's 75 years that Anavets have been in our community, providing support to veterans, providing services to members, and providing through various fundraising efforts significant contribution through donations to community groups. So we were sitting at the table together. They provided nearly $100,000 in fundraising that they had done to various community groups and support to veterans. So of course we acknowledged our gratitude for the service of members past and present to our country and to those serving today. And it was a pleasure to attend with colleagues at that celebration. I'll next turn to the first of 2 council reports. I'll turn to Councillor O'Keefe, please.
Thank you, Mayor. So some updates from ArtSea. So ArtSea had their AGM and a review of their annual report in April, and they had planned to come and present to council, but due to our busy agenda with the zoning bylaw, we couldn't quite fit them in, so I believe they'll come in the fall. And in the meantime, I thought I'd highlight a few things from their annual report and some from their current operations. So in 2023, they had 20,000 visitors visit their gallery, 2,000 attendees at the Salish Sea Lantern Festival. In terms of their membership, 60% are from the Saanich Peninsula, but there's another roughly 40% that are from other areas of the CRD and other areas. So although they are focused on Saanich Peninsula, they're making a significant contribution to that regional arts community, which is, I think, is important to know. In terms of their revenue, their biggest sources of revenue are from us, the town, but that still is only 20%. And program revenue of 22%. More than half actually comes from various grants, sponsorships, and donations. So a fair amount of fundraising required on their part to keep things rolling. In terms of current operations, so the Tallista Gallery is fully booked for this year. They opened bookings for 2025 just in June, and more than half of the dates are now reserved. and that's despite the fact that they've bumped their weekly rental from $400 up to $500. They're also, they receive a very generous grant from Peninsula Co-op that they're using to upgrade the gallery with different display cases and plinths and other equipment. And they're also working with local First Nations to have Tom LaFortune carving as a permanent part of the gallery. They partnered with McTavish Academy and Panorama Recreation Center for World Art Day, and they did those little fairy doors. They had those kits, so those were created by McTavish Art Academy and then sold and displayed at Panorama. And the funds from that was $477. Not a big amount, but that went to ArtSea to help them fund the Lantern Festival that's coming up. So not a big fundraiser, but it's more an example of the sorts of things that they're doing in the community to get people and kids and all ages participating in art in some way. The Salish Sea Lantern Festival, this will be their 11th year, and that'll take place August 17th to 24th with the parade on the 24th at Beacon Park. So that's a fun thing, open to everybody. And you can make your own lantern at home, or you can buy a little jellyfish lantern kit at the Shaw Center to participate. Their studio tour will take place October 4th and 5th, featuring 36 artists. And this will be the 30th year that they've done that tour. And that's a great way for local artists on the peninsula to sell and display their art in their home studios. In terms of the grants program, they've awarded about $23,000 so far for this year. They've changed some of the rules about applying so that organizations can apply on an ongoing basis. So they anticipate there will be more applications come in throughout the year. And they'll also plan to carry forward a portion of the funds into 2025. And the reason for that is they don't get their funding from us until, say, roughly April or May, and they want to be able to provide grants out to those organizations that have events happening in the early part of the year. Some of the challenges, I guess, that they're having, and these are similar to other nonprofit groups that are operating in the community. You know, the funding, of course, the revenue is always tenuous, as it's, as I mentioned before, 60% of it comes from grants, donations, sponsorships, that sort of thing. And for example, this year, there was 2 grants that they applied for, were hoping for, totaling $25,000, and they didn't get that. And the ones that they did receive were less than what they hoped for. And it's just a common issue that all nonprofits are struggling with, you know, and there's a shrinking pool of funds for all those groups to apply for. On the positive side, they hired a new part-time person to focus specifically on sponsorships and grants and fundraising, and she's launched a new sponsorship program that has just this spring that has so far brought in $12,000 from local business organizations and individuals. So they're trying really hard. And volunteers, they also have a shrinking pool of volunteers, like other organizations. You know, many volunteers are in that older demographic, and they're shrinking in numbers, and so that leads to the need for more paid staff to do the work. In summary, I think it's impressive what ArtSea is able to do with the handful of board members they have. There's 6 of them, and they're all working board members and a very small group of staff. They also do a really good job at collaborating with other community partners like Panorama and McTavish, the SBIA, Coast Capital, and over the years they've created a lot of goodwill in the community, so that's allowed them to access some in-kind supports as well from various organizations. So just want to say thanks to ArtSea Board and their volunteers who support our artists and provide such wonderful benefits to the residents of our community. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Keith, for the very positive and full update. We appreciate it. I'll turn to colleagues if there are any questions. Seeing none, I'll turn to Councillor Duck.
Thank you, Mayor, and I would like to give an update on the South Island Prosperity Partnership. Held their annual AGM in the middle of June this year. I attended it in conjunction with Councillor O'Keefe and Councillor Novak to hear a very engaging presentation given by the interim CEO, Dallas Gislin. And it was really quite interesting. He took the approach of a Taylor Swift economic report, and it was very entertaining, and he did a good job of it. But each of you received a copy of the annual report. It's also available online. And just a quick highlight on that, what this partnership has done over the past 8 or 9 years. SIPP by the numbers, which is on page 3, $1.64 per capita from the municipal partners, and most of the municipalities, with the exception of a couple, are involved. That contributed over half of what the operating budget is, which is $2.45. But the interesting part of that is that with that amount of money, they've been able to raise $1.63 million, or $1.63 per dollar of contribution, for a total of $8.52 million. And that works out to $93.20 per capita for the region, which is pretty remarkable in that. And I think it's important to recognize that, quite often each municipality is looking for what it does for them. And I think what's important is to recognize what it's doing for the region. And I quite often will use the quote that a rising tide floats all boats. And although we don't see a direct return maybe to city, it does to the region and benefits the economy of the region in many different ways, including people that work in this community farther afield. The reason I mentioned the interim CEO, Dallas Gislin, is that because currently there is a search underway for a new CEO. Emily de Rosenthal has left to start her own business, and a global business which is based here in Victoria. So that's an outcome of that project that she's working on. I represent the municipalities on the selection committee, and we're receiving applicants from all across Canada with very good, deep expertise, and I look forward to that selection being made and a new CEO coming in, which I think will just broaden the possibilities and the potential of this small organization and what it can do for the region. And with that, I'm open to any questions that may be raised by my colleagues. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Duck, for the update. I'll turn to colleagues. Councillor O'Keefe.
Thank you. Not a question, but just some comments to add some takeaways that I took from the presentation that we got. And one of the things that I think SIPP has done well is bringing in municipal partners and finding out from the municipalities what's important to them. And that's actually a very unique thing in terms of economic development agencies and other jurisdictions. And so just for example, one of the things that they're trying to find out from the municipalities is what are the things that is impacting the sustainability and growth of your economy. And one of the things was healthcare was identified at that meeting that we had on these issues. So as a result of that feedback from the municipalities, they reached out to the South Island Division of Family Practice. That division is now a member of SIPP, and they're getting together with them and going to work with municipalities to look at developing strategies that will help attract and welcome new doctors, and to put South Island on the map for doctors and their families as a good place to come and live and practice medicine. So I think that's something good that we're going to get out of them. The other thing they talked about a little bit was about Coast and the work that they've done in the last few months. So, and that's related to that blue economy strategy that we want to develop. So they've now completed, excuse me, a survey of businesses in the ocean and marine sector to map out the current assets that are there to support the sector, and also what is needed to grow the sector further. They've also hired the previous vice president from Camosun College to lead the development of a workforce development strategy for that sector. It's called their Blue Pathways Training Hub. So those are all things where they've done the research, the legwork of the development, and then municipalities like ours who want to develop our blue economy will be able to tap into that. And then finally, their Victoria Rising initiative, where they've rebranded this region, and they're now marketing our region to the world to help attract new business investment and skilled workers. So some of the things that I think are good to know when we think about what is SIPP doing for us lately, those were a few things that I thought were noteworthy. Thank you.
Thank you, and thank you for the tag team update. We'll next go to staff reports under 13, and the first under 13A is the tree removal request at 2055 Mills Road West. I'll turn to Ms. Clare, please, for an introduction.
Good evening. As the mayor suggested, this report relates to a tree removal application for 2 giant sequoia trees at 2055 Mills Road West. Both trees are protected by size, as they're over 1 meter each in diameter. Giant sequoias, just for your information, are a very large species of tree. These trees are about 40 years old, and the arborist said that they're quite young for their species, so they will continue to grow. They're not typically suitable for urban environments. However, these 2 particular trees have a risk rating of low, both by the submitted arborist report, and the town's arborist has reviewed them, and they're not at a big risk at this time, and therefore staff have denied the application. And I'm here to answer any questions if you have them.
Thank you. I'll turn to Councillor Garnett.
Thank you, Mayor. Through you to staff. Is there any concerns around the, in relation to the root structure in terms of town's infrastructure?
At this time, no serious issues have presented themselves.
Thank you. Thank you, Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor Garnett. Councillor Novak.
Thank you, Ms. Clary, and through you, Mayor, to Ms. Clary. I noticed the trees have been topped, and I read somewhere in your report that they were not topped with permission. Do you think that will affect the longevity of the tree, or does the arborist suggest that topping it the way it has been topped? I think it's probably lost somewhere between 1/3 and 1/2 of its height that would have been had it been allowed to grow naturally. Do you think that would affect the longevity of the tree?
Through to Councillor Novak, definitely improper pruning does impact the longevity of the tree. At this time, there doesn't appear to be any significant, there's no significant, like the tree's not in decline as a result of this improper pruning at this time.
Okay, thank you. And there is a fire hydrant adjacent to the second or the easternmost of those 2 sequoia trees. And further to Councillor Garnett's comments, do you think that underground infrastructure would be in jeopardy if the tree were allowed to remain for any period of time?
Through to Councillor Novak, there hasn't been any evidence of water leaking at this location. If there was, and you know, there may be emergency. These are on private property. I should clarify, they're on private property, so they would be private infrastructure may be damaged. However, there is a situation where if an underground utility is broken, there may need to be an emergency removal in the future. But at this time, there's no evidence of that.
Okay, thank you. And with respect to policy, is it our policy to wait until there's a disaster before we take action?
Councillor Novak, again, trees are challenging, right? Because I believe a previous arborist report stated that with no trees, there is no risk, right? Where it's inherent with trees that some risk comes along with their limb structure, their root structure, their living organisms. They're constantly changing. So it's really hard to know in advance when that time will be, that large limb falls or that root goes into the sewer main. However, we're doing our best at the the direction of council through the urban forest strategy, town staff are doing our best to protect all existing trees as much as possible. So that is the approach we are taking in this matter.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you. I'll turn to Mr. Hasek, please.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. No, we certainly do not wait until there's a disaster. We wait until there's a certain evidence of decline that might lead to problems, but not anything more dramatic than that.
Thank you, Mr. Hasek. Any further questions? I have one question through the staff, and that is reference has been made to the utilities that actually are underneath these two trees. We see the fire hydrant immediately under. I don't know which direction the water supply comes, but the applicant made reference to the utilities to their building being underneath those two trees. Can staff confirm can staff confirm that that would be water, wastewater? Is there any stormwater, hydro? I mean, I do see a cover of something.
Through to the mayor, I can look this up. This would have been helpful to have earlier, but I can look this up on the town's GIS, so I can respond in a
No,
minute.
I apologize for not asking sooner. It just arose having heard colleagues' questions. So I'll leave my question there. And seeing no further questions, we do have a recommendation. I'll turn to Councillor Duncan.
I'm going to move a recommendation that the request to remove the protected giant sequoia trees from 2055 Mills Road West be approved. That's different from the staff recommendation, but.
Do we have a seconder? Seconded by Councillor Novak. I'll turn to Councillor Duncan for motivation.
Sorry, my speaker wasn't on. I don't know if I should repeat that.
Could you please?
Yeah, thank you. My recommendation is the request to remove the protected giant sequoia trees from 2055 Mills Road West be approved, which differs from the staff recommendation.
And I second with
Councillor Novak seconds. Please, Councillor Duncan.
No, thank you. And I understand the staff recommendation and why they made it, because they're following the letter of our bylaw and that's their job. However, since we're the political table, I think it's our job to look at it in context, which is that these are giant sequoia trees, as was pointed out. And the purpose of having trees protected by size is to preserve old trees, perhaps that were original to the town site before things were begun to be built. By definition, giant sequoia are foreign species. They were not here when the town site was built. They were imported from California, and specifically these ones were imported by this property owner, and he pointed out when he planted them that he didn't know what they were. And he's very correct that these trees do not belong here at all. They will become a problem. They're not one right now because, as they pointed out, they're very young for this species, but they will become a problem. They're not going to stay small. They don't do that. They're giant sequoia. You know, while they're not causing a problem and I'm not worried about any risk to infrastructure proximally, I don't see why we would deny a man doing something now, which we know he's going to have to do, until it became a problem and it's going to cost more money to fix those things later. And that tree is going to be way bigger to take down. By the time they will have to take that thing down, it actually might be a problem to take it down in terms of stuff dropping. I would much prefer he takes out these unsuitable trees now while they're still small and easy to manage and not causing a problem, and planted things that were suitable that we know we're going to ask him to do in a couple of years from now anyway. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Duncan. I'll turn to Councillor Novak.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Of course, I concur with Councillor Duncan. I spent quite a bit of time looking at that particular situation with the trees, and I am convinced that those trees don't belong there. They're way too large. They're much larger than the typical tree that you would see planted anywhere in Duncan, never mind on an industrial site. I'm very sensitive of the need to retain and allow our canopy, our forest canopy, to flourish. But there has to be a balance, I feel, between the practicality of owning property, operating businesses, and ensuring that our forest canopy is sustained. The driveway in front of the building is impeded by the root ball that has grown up out of the soil and has limited the ability for two cars to pass each other, where that driveway was originally designed for that to happen. And now that's just not possible because of the way those trees bulge out. Yes, those trees will become a problem. No, I don't think that we should wait until they become a problem. I also believe that the landowner does have a right to manage his property in a way that makes sense. And I think that allowing the removal of those trees with the replacement of at least 2, if not 4 more, of species that are more suitable to that location is the sensible way to go. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Novak. Before going to Councillor Garnett, I'll just turn a question through to staff, and that is, what would be the required number of tree replacement if these 2 were being removed?
It would be 2 trees per tree removed for any tree that's protected by size. So it would be 4 trees in total would be required to be replanted.
And are they all 4 trees required to be on that site?
No, the property owner could have a refundable deposit where they could plant them on their site and then have the money refunded to them in 2 years if the trees were still healthy. Or if they didn't have room on their site, they could do non-refundable deposits where the town would take those funds and plant trees elsewhere in Sydney.
Thank you, Ms. Clary. I'll turn to Councillor Garnett.
Thank you, Mayor. I won't support the recommendation. I think there's already a lack of trees in that area. Visited the site as well. I don't think that drive aisle is meant for 2 cars, because when I visited, there were cars parked on one side of it, all up and down it. So I think it was meant to be more of a parking and one way through and out. And I don't see the root balls as being that much of a problem. There is a bit of heaving, which I think risk could be alleviated by, like many people do, spray painting where the roots go up, so that people will know there's a potential trip hazard there. But at present, it doesn't seem to be that challenging to me. The actual, not worried more about the town infrastructure underneath and realizing that's not an issue, that gives me a bit of comfort. I've been by the site multiple times, and I was disconcerted to see the topping that was done, and it's actually referenced in the report from the arborist about how it's increased risk of cracking or failure, but it also there's several protection factors from the other limbs underneath that will protect it from falling on items below. Having seen that the topping was done quite a few months ago, the trees are actually still looking very healthy, so that's a plus. I'm not sure if they'll be able to grow to their full potential the way it was topped, which is why I don't think this may become a big an issue as others are suggesting. But you know, I hesitate because we have talked many times. We have tree removal requests regularly, and we have approved way more than we've denied. So I think, you know, when you have 2 trees like this, and yes, maybe they're not species native to here, and yes, maybe this isn't the perfect area for them, but we don't know what the future holds. This entire site could be redeveloped, and then the trees could function quite well with whatever's put in there in the future. So I'm comfortable with leaving them as they are. I think there are ways to mitigate some of the concerns that the proponent has suggested in their letter, but I go with staff's recommendation. And for me, the most critical thing when I look at removal of trees is the risk associated, and it's low. It's low from staff's arborist, and it's low from the arborist that was hired by the proponent. So for me, that's the critical component to look at here. Thank you, Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor Garnett. I'll turn to Councillor O'Keefe.
Thank you. I'll support the motion for a few reasons. Nobody wants to see trees come down. It's a sad fact, though, that they, you know, these ones in particular, it is true that they're healthy. They're currently not at risk of falling over. There's a tripping hazard that could be mitigated with paint. Yes, that's true. But to me, the big issue is the point that they are outgrowing their limited planting space, and the report does say that they pose future risk to the building wall, the footings, and the perimeter drains. So we got to weigh the risks of that to the homeowner. And having, you know, being able to when do we say that, okay, there's one crack in the foundation, you know, now you can remove the tree? I mean, we know it's gonna happen. The fact that just because they've been topped, that they're not gonna grow to their full potential, trees are gonna grow where they wanna grow. You know, they're gonna grow into the perimeter drains. They're gonna put pressure on the foundation. And as a homeowner, I think we have to allow them the opportunity to mitigate that risk, sad as it is to let these go. But to me, it's a balancing act. And in terms of the risk to the homeowner's premises, I have to vote in favor of, unfortunately, letting the trees go. Thanks.
Thank you, Councillor O'Keefe. I know you intended, you made reference to your own home, but you also made reference to that property being homeowner, and it is a business owner, just for clarity. But we know you knew that, and no trouble. Councillor Rintoul.
Thank you, Mayor. And before my comments, I don't know if staff are comfortable trying to circle back. I know you're looking for the GIS mapping, and if you don't mind, I'd like to hear that response to your initial question, if it's available. Apologies for putting you in the spot.
Sure, through to Councillor Rintoul, there is a water connection directly under the tree right beside the fire hydrant, it appears from our mapping system, and the town's water main does run very closely underneath the trees as well. However, we haven't seen any evidence of leaking at this time.
Thank you. So I guess I'm not surprised that there's, you know, infrastructure, given the nature of this location, to the building. Having said that, I'm really struggling with this, folks. I think knowing that these are fairly young trees, and knowing that our town arborist as well as the contract arborists have indicated that they're quite healthy, I'm kind of concerned with taking this approach at this stage. I respect the business owners, the property owners, you know, right to manage their land, but you know, this is a resource that falls under the town's bylaw with respect to trees, and difficult decision for me. I'm inclined at this point not to support the motion. I'll leave my comments there. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Rintoul. Seeing no further speakers, I'll speak. At this point, I am supportive of the recommendation, and one point that has perhaps been touched on but not been made as fully is, when is a tree a tree? And we can see that this tree has been topped very significantly. I don't know what portion of it, but the girth of the tree at the base has got to be one of the largest in Sydney. And the top of it, where it was topped, has got to be this big around. So I think quite a bit was taken off. It's a giant sequoia. It's 40 years old. In one of the reports, it talked about it living, this species living well over 100 years. You know, at what point during its life, and sorry, it can grow to, I don't know, excess of some very tall height. At what point does it actually cause the problem? There is a wide agreement that these trees are inappropriate to the location. The owner who planted them 4 years ago didn't know and realizes it was a mistake. And quite frankly, they're outgrowing the space that was allocated for the landscaping. Apart from that, but coming back to when is a tree, not only have the tops been have they been significantly topped, it appears that branches have been taken off lower down, and so the actual canopy of the tree starts quite high off the ground and is quite limited as to what it would normally be if it was in its natural setting. And so it doesn't look like the giant sequoias that I've seen either in person or in pictures. It's a severely pruned giant sequoia tree where they're trying to mitigate the risk, whether it's limb failure or what have you, to their business operations. So, and you have to. My view is that we have to take the longer term view of this, and what is the potential of contribution of tree canopy or ambience to the town, to that part of town, with these existing trees versus having 4 replacement trees or however many of 4 replacement trees can go in that location. I can remember when the Shoals Center was built. So the previous Silver Threads building was leveled. It was a bare land space. And if you look at the dozen trees that are across the front of it now, they're up approaching the 3rd and 4th story with enormous canopies. And that's in, 15 years. So I'm sure with appropriate species being planted here, in the long run, it's going to be more appropriate both for our urban forest canopy, but more appropriate to the business owner being able to operate as they desire and reasonably desire from that location. I'll leave my comments there. We had one more first-time speaker, Councillor Duck, and we'll provide the opportunity for any second-time speakers. Councillor Duck.
Thank you, Mayor, and if I may, through to staff. Did the applicant give any indication of what he was prepared to do if both these trees were to be removed? I understand we have the 2-for-1 sort of, but did he give any indication what he wanted to do if these trees were removed?
Through to Councillor Duck, no, we haven't had that conversation yet with respect to like how many trees will be replanted in this exact location.
Okay, so his application was just the removal of the trees, and he recognizes that he will be replacing each tree with 2 if it goes through with the removal.
Sometimes applicants don't necessarily recognize that in advance, but we will tell him that if this were to be approved. And then the way it typically works is if a tree removal application's approved, then and the applicant pays the fees, the town's arborist would then work with them to determine a suitable spot to plant trees. And it usually falls down to the town's arborist best judgment based on years of experience if there is actually space in the available planting medium. And then he would typically work with the property owner to make sure the tree goes back, whichever trees go back in the number based on the available space.
Thank you, and excuse my ignorance, but in those trees that are going in that we would recommend, what's the maturity of that tree? Is it a seedling? Is it much more than that? What's the level of growth in the tree?
It depends. Typically, you'd want something of a similar caliber. However, these trees are quite unique, so it would really be up to the town's arborist's best judgment, and also what the applicant would do. Larger trees are often more costly, so what they can afford as well, right? So a number of elements go into whichever type of tree and the caliper tree that's replanted at the time.
Thank you. If I may continue on that, Mayor, I like Councillor Rintoul, have some challenge in discussing this, and as my colleagues have mentioned, I'm wondering if there's an opportunity to table this motion and this application for further discussions with the applicant, is what the applicant is willing to do, because right now all we're hearing is just wants the trees out, and maybe there's some receptivity to that, and I didn't see anywhere in the report.
If I might just take a moment, I seem to recall reading somewhere that the applicant was willing to plant or have 1 or more replacement trees there. I just can't find it in the report. Councillor Duncan, do you have it? Do you have it there?
Yeah, it's right in his letter that he said remove and replant with a suitable species, and he actually put that. I'm sorry, but I remember that he had said he'd suggested he would do that.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
So, sorry, is your request, do you still have a request to table then? Or to, it would be referred, tables within a meeting refers to another meeting?
No, not at this time.
Yeah, thank you. No, I just have a question kind of arising from that discussion. This is a really weird situation I feel like we found ourselves in. I understand that when it comes to replanting, the arborist would work with him because he's be removing a tree and replacing. But clearly he was able to purchase and then plant wildly inappropriate species here because garden centers are able to sell these things. And to me, this is kind of like when we had a problem with people being able to, say, buy a tiger cub at the store and then keep it at home because, there was no limitations, or, plants can be just as inappropriate to keep as certain animals. And we are left as a town in the very bizarre position of essentially arguing the equivalent of forcing a man to keep a wildly inappropriate exotic tree in a position simply because he made the very bad decision that he was capable of making at the time to plant them in the first place. And so I'm wondering if there is some way, I guess when we do a next edit with the tree bylaw, to prevent this sort of thing. I don't know how we would, because if it can be bought at a garden center, it can be bought, but finding ourselves in a position of arguing people have to keep the tree equivalent of a tiger cub in an urban area is very strange to me, and I don't like being in this position.
Councillor Duncan, could I perhaps turn that to direct question
Yeah.
to staff and that?
A point of order. Beg your pardon, I agree, it's worth discussion, but it's not speaking to the motion. I would ask that we move forward and call the question. Thank you.
I would consider it a question arising. I don't think it pertains directly to the question, but certainly a question through to staff. So I won't proceed with my question, and I'll acknowledge the point of order and look to call the question unless there are further speakers, or if you wish to speak further directly to the motion.
I don't know. I don't know at what point. I guess it would be a bylaw if there's an educational component we can do to prevent this sort of
So
thing happening.
we'll leave that aspect until arising, if you wish.
Sure.
Okay. Seeing no further discussion, I'll call the question. All in favor? Opposed? Councillor Duck, Councillor Garnett, and Councillor O'Toole opposed. The motion carries. So a question arising to staff, and I'll direct the question, is does the town have any purview with regards to trees planted on private property?
Unfortunately, we don't have much control over what people plant on their own property. We do have some information on our website about suitable trees that could be planted. The town's arborist is always available to ask people, and I think there's a lot more awareness now than there was in the past about suitable species. Maybe not, but there is our tree preservation bylaw does allow a little bit of flexibility as well. If this was a previous amendment that was brought forward, if a tree was planted as part of a development permit but wasn't protected by size yet, there was a bit more flexibility there, where like if it was just the wrong tree for the wrong location. But I'm not sure if any other staff have any other comment on that, but we don't really have control over.
Ms. Bragg?
Sure. Thank you. To follow on Ms. Clary's comments, if the property is within a development permit area and the property owner applies for a permit to alter the landscaping, then staff review the proposed trees that are proposed to be removed and retained. And at that point, there may be comments on the species of trees that are proposed and their suitability for the location. But not every property owner applies for permits, and clearly 40 years ago there was no development permit area for this industrial area. Thank you.
Thank you. We'll turn to the next item on the agenda under 13B, which is
Point
amendment.
of information, could I request a 5-minute recess, please?
Yep, we'll recess for 5 minutes. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you, colleagues. So we'll reconvene now at, thank you. And we're turning to item 13B, which is amendment to policy DV-013, bonus density and community amenity contributions for the RM7-WS zone. I'll turn to Mr. Newcomb for an introduction, please. Good evening.
Good evening. Thank you, Mr. Mayor. So, as mentioned, this is a proposed amendment to policy DV-013, the bonus density policy. The proposed amendment is specific to the RM7-WS zone, which is the new zone recently adopted on the south and east perimeter of the Galaran neighborhood. The rationale for this change comes out of the adoption of the town's new zoning bylaw, number 2275, and the structure of the RM7-WS zone itself. It's structured much differently than the other RM zones in the bylaw in terms of the way the bonus density in that zone works. So this amendment is intended to implement an amenity contribution amount that's consistent with the structure of that zone, and the current amount in there of $200 is much too high. As I mentioned, the structure is different, but it also goes along with the town's policy goals in the West Side Local Area Plan and the OCP to encourage housing in that area and facilitate the financial viability of projects. So happy to answer any questions. One final point is that this is somewhat of an interim change through Bill 16, which was adopted in the legislature this spring. The province has mandated that municipalities look at all our bonus density zones, undertake a financial analysis, and update the zone if necessary. And more information on that will be coming forward in the coming weeks in my report on all the provincial legislation. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Newcomb. I'll turn to colleagues if there's any questions. Councillor Gurnett.
Thank you, Mayor. Through you to staff. I'm just looking for a bit of clarification on page 3 of the report. There's a sentence right above the recommendation that reads, this policy change would apply to new development permit applications in the RM7-W7-WS zone, of which there's currently one. Can you point, which one are we talking about there?
That application, through the mayor to Councillor Gurnett, that application has just recently come in, so it's not on the town's active development applications website yet, but it will be very soon.
Okay, great. Thank you. Thank you.
Thanks for the question, Councillor. Councillor O'Keefe. Microphone, please.
Thank you. Through you to staff, can you indulge me and maybe refresh my memory on, I'm still trying to recall why we set the FAR so low on this compared to the other zones. What was our rationale for that? And if we're trying to be consistent with the other zones, why wouldn't we just make the FAR the same as the other zones for there to be some consistency?
Through the mayor to Councillor O'Keefe, that's a good question. The reason essentially is that this bonus density zone includes not just this bonus density amenity payment component, but it also includes a number of other requirements in the zone. Among those are road dedication amounts, parks contributions, and by setting the zone, by structuring the zone in this way, it helps to ensure that the town achieves those policy goals.
Okay. One more question.
Please go ahead.
If I may. So my understanding of the new legislation, as you said, there's new rules, and we may have to go through, revise all of this anyways, which it seems is likely the case. So I was going to ask, why don't we just wait rather than do an interim thing? So are we doing this because there is a development that's come forward that would be in jeopardy if we didn't do this now? Rather than, why not wait until, the legislation is out there. They've told us what we have to do. They're going to come out with some further guidance. So why wouldn't we just kind of wait for that, and then rather than doing piecemeal things?
Yeah, again, through the mayor to Councillor O'Keefe, it's another good question. It's not for any specific one development. without this change, I think staff think it likely that no development in this zone will be viable under the current bonus density policy. And that's why this issue was highlighted in that April 15th staff report, because when this zone was developed and the structure of it was put in place, staff recognized that the amount that's currently in there won't work. It would result in a very, very large amenity payment. And staff, I would say, think it's unlikely that any development would be able to go forward in the near term with the current amount.
Councillor Heath?
Yeah, sure, thanks.
Thank you. I'll turn to Ms. Verhagen.
Thank you. Through the mayor, just to add to Mr. Newcomb's comments there, as was pointed out on the report, a rate on the lower side will also help work towards the town fulfilling its new housing target order goals set by the province just recently and announced by the province just a week or two ago. So setting these rates lower will help encourage more development in this area, which has already been designated by the OCP for increased residential growth. So whatever we can do to work towards those housing target order requirements is a good thing. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Verhagen. You still have the floor, Councillor Keefe.
Yeah, thanks. So just follow up to some of those comments. I totally understand.
Sorry, I'll just interject that we're asking questions at this
Yes.
point. If we want to deliberate that, we're coming to that shortly.
Yes, yeah. No, I understand, the rationale for, we need to get more housing built, and so we're lowering the payment. Any concerns, though, about, the whole part of, with the bonus density is getting additional funds for community amenities and parks and other things. Any concerns about our ability to be able to get those extra sorts of things with such a reduction?
Through the mayor again to Councillor O'Keefe. So although on its face it is a reduction in that specific amount, because of the way the zones is being structured, the overall payment that's expected to come from these developments will be commensurate with the other RM zones. The spread between that base density and bonus density is much higher, and the overall amount will be generally consistent. If the RM7-WS zone was structured similarly, obviously this wouldn't be necessary, but overall, in the end, that chunk of funds that we expect from these projects will be consistent with those RM zones. It's just, I guess to use an analogy, one of the typical RM zones are large on this side and smaller on this side, and the RM7-WS zone is bigger on this side and smaller on this side, but the end result put together is the same.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Seeing no further speakers, I'd look for someone to move the recommendation. Councillor Garnett.
Thank you, Mayor. I'll move that policy DV-013, bonus density and community amenity contributions, be amended to set the amenity contribution amount in the RM7-WS zone to $50 per square meter under Section 4 calculations.
I'll second.
We have it moved and seconded. I'll turn to the mover and seconder. Seeing none. Any further discussion? Seeing none, all in favor? Motion carries unanimous. Thank you. We're turning to item 13C, which is the FCM Local Leadership for Climate Adaptation Grant Program. We don't have an introduction, but we do have a report with a recommendation. Councillor O'Keefe?
Question through you.
You're free to ask a question first.
Okay, sure. So, what I'm wondering is, in regards to the flood risk resilience program, it sounds like a good thing to do, and if we're getting federal money, that's great. However, what I'm wondering is, in terms of flood risk resilience, in the 26 years that I've lived here, I don't recall any flood event. We've had some, big rainfall. There's been some flooding, mainly I think to do with maybe storm drains being overloaded, that sort of thing. And so what I'm wondering is, in terms of our climate action plan, are there other things that we might be able to use this money for that might have a sort of greater impact? Like, for example, instead of having a flood risk resilience program for residents, be able to do more in terms of mitigating stormwater mitigation measures. So I don't know if those sorts of, I don't know if what we selected here was limited by what was in the parameters for the program.
I'll turn that to staff. Mr. Hisik.
Thank you. Perhaps Mr. Newcomb can add to this, but when we apply for grants that fall outside of our existing work plan, we have to be really careful about taking on additional projects that we don't really have the capacity for. This was a program chosen because we could essentially contract all of it out. Mr. Newcomb, do you have anything further?
Well, thank you, Mr. Hisik. I guess I will say as well that I did speak to Ms. Gilmar about sort of the rationale behind this component of the grant application. And I think she felt it was a bit of a natural extension of the current sea level rise project that's underway and some of the detailed data that we're going to get out of that. Certainly in the longer term, overland flooding is a concern. In the nearer term, there is a concern around increased amount of atmospheric rivers and that source of flooding as well. So I think the feeling was that this would complement projects that are already underway. The town is already looking at its own infrastructure, and as we do projects, there's I think an awareness that if things are too low, they need to be raised up, so on and so forth. So we're looking at municipal infrastructure, but there's I think a general feeling that there's less awareness amongst the general public about what they can do to ensure their own properties and private property is protected as well. So I think that's sort of the rationale behind this component of the project.
Councillor Keith.
Thank you.
Thank you. I'll turn to, sorry, I saw Councillor Rintoul next.
I was ready to move the recommendation unless colleagues
Please
have
go ahead
questions.
and we can have questions during while the motion.
Thank you. I'll move the recommendation that the town of Sydney's application to the Federation of Canadian Municipalities Local Leadership for Climate Adaptation, Adaptation and Action Grant Program for Community Climate Risk Resilience Project be supported.
Second.
And seconded by Councillor Garnett. I'll turn to the mover and seconder.
Nothing further.
Seconder.
Yeah, I actually do have a couple of questions of
Please
staff,
go
if
ahead.
that's okay. Through you to staff, I'm assuming based on the report that discussions with District of North Saanich have already taken place. Okay, thank you. And with regards to the task B, the one that would involve staff resources, and given that there's a 3-year time span where that has to be completed, are there any concerns as far as staff capacity, having to push things forward or?
Through to Councillor Garnett, we already had 3 of these water fountains in our current 5-year plan,
Yeah.
so I don't think it'll be an issue to put 3 more in if we are awarded the grant funding.
Great, thank you. And I just want to thank Ms. Gilmar for finding this, and what quite possibly is the longest grant program name I've ever seen. But it's just great work on her. She's really good at finding grants, and just pass along my appreciation. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Garnett. Councillor Duck, did you have a question or deliberation?
Councillor Garnett got it answered. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Duncan.
Thank you. I guess it's kind of a question that was following up on what Terry was asking. As I was thinking about it, I was recalling the wastewater agenda where they were talking about, I mean, I guess a similar task, and that they were trying to get homeowners to take care of cross connections and leaks on their pipes to help maintain, infiltration and inflow, which is a storm event problem from rainfall, right? And so as Councillor O'Keefe was asking about, the climate change impacts being more from storm events, I'm wondering how much of this flood risk for the people who can pay for it at any time, or who might be in those 100 buildings that are outside of, say, the ocean flood risk, would qualify or would have potentially people investigating things like looking at that I&I and that stormwater, because even if they're not going to get overland flow, having that sea level go up is going to cause more problems in our storm sewer and regular sewer potentially. And if that seems like it would be a really good fit together to be able to get on top of all of that at once. Is that something do you know if that is within the purview of what would be looked at?
Through the
Mr.
mayor
Nico.
to Councillor Duncan. I'm sorry, I don't know that the program goes to that level of detail or delves into that area. I would think it would, just given that any sort of pipes or anything on a property can be a conduit for flooding or water damage. So I would assume so, but I don't know that for sure.
Ms. Cleary?
And just to provide a bit more information about cross connections, we do have smoke testing programs that we're in the process of working with homeowners to remove some cross connections already. So we do have programs where we're constantly working on improving that side of it.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Anything else, I'll just ask the CRD when I go there. Thanks.
Excellent. Councillor Keefe?
Thanks. I won't support the motion only because I think I'm fine with task B, the heat resilience project, putting in water fountains in parks. That makes complete sense to me. Our residents will see benefit from that. In regards to task A, I get staff's explanation that it's something that we can just, get the money, hand it off to a contractor, get them to do education sessions. However, education sessions on how they're going to prepare for flood risk, there's minimal flood risk here. I think the only thing is going to be, as we said before, big storm events. And what I would like us to see, there's nothing that they can do a whole lot of to stop the rain from coming or to how the town manages stormwater exactly. So I'd like to see us in the future put more focus on hiring contractors to do something that will mitigate that storm risk or have a direct impact. And I just think this, in the terms of all the other things we have in our climate action plan, is a relatively low impact for our residents. Thanks.
Thank you, Councillor O'Keefe. I'll turn to Councillor Gannett.
Yeah, thank you, Mayor. I'd just like to point out that we're focusing on atmospheric rivers, which is part of the equation, but there's storm surge. And there's so many homes in our community that are right along the ocean, and they do experience flooding. And consequently, they've been at the presentations at council, or staff has already been, and they've said that they've been very helpful and very informative. So I think this is a good next step. Thank you, Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor Garnett. Seeing no further discussion, I'll call the question. All in favor? Opposed? Councillor O'Keefe is opposed. The motion carries. Thank you. We're going to item 13D, which is award of contract 2024-005 West Side Highway Path Phase 3 construction. We don't have an introduction, but we have a report and a recommendation. I'll turn to colleagues if there are any questions, or someone would move the recommendation, please. Councillor Wintoul.
Move the recommendation that contract 2024-005 for West Side Highway Bike Path Phase 3 construction be awarded to C1 contractors.
Moved by Councillor Wintoul, seconded by Councillor Duncan. I'll turn to the mover.
Yeah, no, thank you. Just pleased to see this moving forward, and this is going to the low bidder who's done some recent work for us that staff were quite comfortable with, so I'm happy to support it.
Thank you. Councillor Duncan. Any further discussion? Seeing none, all in favor? That motion carries unanimous. Thank you. And item 13E is the monthly building report for June. We know that we're receiving it for information on our agenda. There's no motion required. Is there any discussion or questions of staff? Councillor Wintoul.
Yeah, thank you. Just through to staff with respect to the one item which has expired as of July 10th, and just curious, does staff get any feedback when a permit like this expires from the potential developer? Do we know why that's happened? Do we know if they're planning on revisiting it? Any just sort of update, because it's somewhat rare when these expire without any further course of action.
Ms. Reagan.
Thank you. Through the mayor to Councillor Rintoul, no, we've received no communication from the property owner here. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Seeing no further questions, we'll move on to the next item, and that is under correspondence. We've raised two items. The first one, the email from Jay Rosine, was raised by Councillor Rintoul. I'll turn to Councillor Rintoul.
Thank you, Mayor. Through you to staff, thank you for the response to the resident. in your response, you did note that similar complaints regarding noise at the 10 acres patio had been received in the past. And so if I may, through to staff, if you can maybe just outline at what point the town would proceed, to a next step. I think you've given good advice here with respect to trying to have this, noted at the time when the infractions are occurring. But what other latitude does the town maybe have to try and address this with the business?
Ms. Claire?
Through to Councillor Rintoul, we do work with businesses over items like this. We've already been in contact with 10 Acres about this particular complaint, and they've agreed to comply with the regulations. With respect to actually issuing fines for noise complaints, especially that happen late at night when there's no Town of Sydney staff members, we really do need like an RCMP witness to be called at the time to witness the sound. Even if they don't issue a fine at that moment, they could at least be a witness if we were to issue fines. But it's very challenging if we put ourselves in situations where we're issuing fines without sufficient evidence to back it up in court, because then it just ends up being a drain on resources, and then we may not even have enough evidence to actually have the fine stand. So really the best course of action for someone in this situation is to call the RCMP's non-emergency line when it is happening, so they can go and witness the sound that's coming from the building.
Thank you for that, Ms. Clary. I appreciate it, and it's good insight, I think, not just for this individual, but other residents. I'd also note to the individual that filed this complaint that I'm assuming their strata has some leverage with the business operating under the same roof, and so I'm not looking to staff for insight on this. I would just hope that their strata, as well as the town, which the town has, have a continuing dialogue on this particular business under the same premises. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Rintoul, for raising the item. Any further discussion among colleagues? Seeing none, I'll turn to Councillor Duncan to speak to the request to raise the Devon Todd correspondence.
Yeah, thank you. Just in looking at this letter about, kayak or parking for smaller vehicles that are launching kayaks, and the staff's response, the response was fine as it is, except I feel that we didn't quite, get at what he was really the issue he was bringing up, the part of the issue he was bringing up, which was not necessarily the availability of 24-hour or longer parking, but rather the proximity to the boat launch. Simply because I know for any boat, putting it in the water and then going back to your car and or your truck and taking your trailer some distance, it's not just is there a spot available, it's how close it is and how long you're leaving your boat unattended before you go back. And I imagine with a kayak that concern is increased because they're lighter and a lot more stealable, I think, than a regular boat if they have to travel a long way. And so while I don't have anything to propose at this time in terms of solving that, since I had previously referred the idea of a staff report to come for strategic planning on whether we would discuss this, I thought this letter and that kind of issue was something that maybe we could just kind of refer to that package, that the idea of actually getting non-motorized boat users better space is something that's come up numerous times in this community with kayak users, and the idea of actually giving people who are doing a kind of a more environmentally friendly boating experience, I thought would be something that would be good to look at that time, if we could do that.
Councillor, would you like to make a motion to refer?
Yes, so I'd like to refer this. I'm not sure what to refer it to. I believe it was referred to the staff report on boating options.
I'll turn to staff if
I remember it was Randy's suggestion about
fits
how to
with-
do it, and he's not here now.
If
So.
that fits with our collective recollection?
Yeah.
Yes.
I recall it being referred to strategic plan. I wasn't sure we committed to a report ahead of time, or that it would be based on discussion at that time.
And
I'll just make
Yep.
the motion then to refer to the package for boat options for strategic planning, and then when staff looks at what they're going to be doing at that time, it'll be there.
Ms. Nelson, do you have a motion captured? Great. Do we have a seconder, please? Seconded by Councillor Novick. Any further discussion? Seeing none, all in favor? Opposed? Councillor Garnett is opposed. The motion carries. Thank you. We're next just receiving for information the remaining two items under correspondence for information. We don't require a motion. We have no notices of motion this evening. I'm turning to 17, motion to go on camera. I'm turning to Councillor Gurnett with appreciation.
Thank you, Mayor. I'll move that it is in the opinion of council that the public interest requires that persons other than members of the council and officers be excluded from the meeting to consider confidential matters regarding employee relations and the acquisition, disposition, and expropriation of land or improvements pursuant to section 90.1C and E of the Community Charter, and that council continue the meeting in closed session.
You have it moved and seconded. All in favor? Motion carries unanimous. Thank you. A mover and seconder to adjourn, moved by Councillor Duck, seconded by Councillor Novick. All in favor? We are adjourned. Thank you, everyone. Thank you, staff. We'll reconvene in 5 minutes.